Always, thank you so much for your time. Now, given President Zuma's history of defiance to calls that he should step down, do you think he will?
It's a difficult one to say at this point whether the president of the country will step down. And I heard in another clip where Ace Magashule was referring to me as the president of the ANC, and I guess it's still embedded in the mind that just a couple of months ago, Jacob Zuma was the president of the ANC, and we know that pre the ANC's elective conference, there had been attempts within the ANC to get him to step down. Those have failed. Remember that also in Parliament there were attempts to get him to step down and refused. But Jacob Zuma has always said that I, as Jacob Zuma, member of the ANC, once the ANC says that I must step down, I will heed that call and I must step down. I've seen a couple of reports where people have been indicating that the president's problem at the moment as it stands is that no one has ever come to him and said that Mr. President, we want you to step down as the president of the ANC, and this is a call that comes from the ANC. The NEC has sat down, they've taken that decision. The NWC has also taken that decision, and now they've tasked the top 6 who would be meeting with the president now and making that call and saying, President Jacob Zuma, you must step down. This will be probably the first official meeting in where the president will be asked to step down.
So should he indeed step down, what are the implications of that for the ANC and for the country? Wouldn't that open a Pandora's box, for instance?
What happens when the president steps down? When the president steps down, he will probably make an announcement like Thabo Mbeki did back in 2000 and 2008. He'll probably make a public announcement, send his letter of resignation. Coincidentally, to the Speaker of Parliament, who is Gwede Mantashe, and Thabo Mbeki also sent his letter of resignation to Gwede Mantashe, who was also the Speaker at the time. Quite an interesting conundrum that you face at that, as it stands at the moment. But the big question is, who would be the person who steps in? Yeah. Should President Jacob Zuma step aside as president of the country, and there's a new interim president that steps in, if there is an interim president? Because the other thing is that when you listen to the Cyril Ramaphosa camp, they are making the argument that there shouldn't be an interim president, and Ramaphosa should step in as the president of the country. It was different during Thabo Mbeki's time. When Thabo Mbeki stepped down, it was Kgalema Motlanthe who had to step in as the president of the country. And Jacob Zuma, who was the president of the ANC at the time, he wasn't a member of parliament. But this time around, you have the ANC president who is a member of parliament. So would Ramaphosa then step in to become president of the country? And in terms of our constitution, what does this mean? Does this mean that we could face something quite similar to what happened in Burundi, where Pierre Nkurunziza stepped in as a president, as an interim president, and then started his new term, as he believed, started his 2 terms, and after that there was that contestation saying that no, you can't get into a 2-term because you already started your term mid-term. And for Ramaphosa it would be the same thing. What does our constitution say about that? If Ramaphosa steps in now, does this also count as a term?
What if he becomes so defiant? What if he refuses to step down despite the ANC top 6 asking him to do so? What would that mean?
There have been hints that have been dropped. If you listen to Ramaphosa, who has continuously said, even in the interviews post the ANC's January 8 celebrations, he said that we do not want to humiliate the president. And he's emphasized this point that the president must not be humiliated. And one then starts thinking what would be humiliating to the president of the country. And that would be removing the president of the country in parliament and having a motion of no confidence, or whether it's an impeachment against the president, and the president is removed. And we know what the implications for that is. In terms of the motion of confidence, if the motion of no confidence, which has now been tabled, which will be tabled on the 22nd of February, if that passes, that means the entire cabinet resigns. That means the entire cabinet of President Jacob Zuma, including Ramaphosa himself, who's the deputy president of the country, he must also resign as a cabinet minister. But if they push for the impeachment, that means it's only President Jacob Zuma that resigns. But also some of the benefits. It means that President Jacob Zuma would lose all of his benefits. As we know, according to our country's laws, that once you are president of the country, you continue enjoying the perks of being president, including the presidential guard and so forth, as well as a salary that will be afforded to you. But once there is an impeachment, it means that you've been summarily fired from your job, which means that you forfeit those benefits.
Okay. Now, opposition parties, particularly the EFF, said that Zuma staying in office would be the best for 2019 opposition. Well, ostensibly because they would apparently have it easy because the ANC would significantly lose support with Zuma at the helm. I mean, on the other hand, they want him to leave office now. So what would be the ideal situation?
You know the strange thing with the opposition parties, and if that was their strategy to have President Jacob Zuma remain in office, why then have the motion of no confidence in him? Why do you want to table a motion of no confidence? If anything, if the opposition wanted President Jacob Zuma to stay in office and believed that him staying in office would benefit them, then they shouldn't have this motion of no confidence. They would leave him in office, like you've seen what happened in the Western Cape, in the city of Cape Town, where the ANC stepped back and said that we're withdrawing our motion of no confidence against the mayor of the city of Cape Town, because they didn't want to get involved with that. They needed someone like that to ridicule her in the meantime, and saying that there are these allegations against this particular person. Remember, also leading up to the ANC's elective conference, analysts have been making the argument that if Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma wins, who has been seen to be sympathetic towards the president, and of course President Jacob Zuma had endorsed her, that would mean it would be a great deal for the opposition parties. That would mean that when the opposition parties go on the campaign trail, they can campaign and say that here you have somebody who would be sympathetic to President Jacob Zuma, who we have been accusing, and this is now the opposition accusing the president of being corrupt. And then on the other hand, and this is something that we should never forget, Sampear, is the corruption charges that the president could face. What implications those could have for the party, and what implications those could have for the country. Because remember, even in the president's representation that he made before being elected president of the country back in 2009, he made the argument that you can't try a sitting president, and we'll have to wait and see whether that is possible. If the NPA comes out and say that we are prosecuting President Jacob Zuma, will they go ahead and prosecute President Jacob Zuma? Well,
according to unconfirmed reports, Aldrin, some people have been saying that should the ANC or should the top six eventually convince Zuma to step down, he said he insisting that he would step down after delivering SONA. So what difference would that make, delivering SONA before or after he's resigned?
One would actually think that it would probably mean that this is, we meet each other halfway. We believe that you shouldn't be addressing SONA because of the chaos that would erupt. We know that the EFF, for instance, they've made it clear that SONA shouldn't be going ahead. They've asked for postponement of SONA. They've also said that they are threatening to go to court if SONA does go ahead. So there is the cloud that hangs there. But whether President Jacob Zuma would deliver that State of the Nation address is something else. It's something that we have to wait and see indeed, whether the president, and that's the president of the country, President Jacob Zuma, would be the person that delivers the State of the Nation address, and what the implications would be going forward. Because now we know that there is that motion of no confidence against the president, which will be on the 22nd of February.
Now, Ace Magashule is still holding on to President Jacob Zuma's ANC. Well, he said that he even said that is Jacob Zuma still the president of the ANC. Now, he's been on the tirade attacking the leadership, or making veiled attacks on the ANC leadership. And we're getting reports of plots of him trying to, reverse the gains of the national conference. But then he suddenly changed tune, saying that we are going to the meeting not with an agenda, not with an attitude that President Zuma should go or not. So clearly he is embracing the possibility that he might step down.
Yeah, the difficulty with the ANC top six as it stands at the moment, it would almost seem that they've forgotten that we are out of the elective conference mode, campaigning for elective conference. We are out of that mode. If there's anyone to defend right now, it would be the ANC that the party needs to be defending. It's not an individual that the party must be defending. And you mentioned Ace Magashule when he spoke in KwaZulu-Natal. He made the assertion about and saying that people must not buy McDonald's. People must not eat McDonald's anymore. And of course, we know who the quote-unquote McDonald's man is. That is Cyril Ramaphosa. He also emphasized that don't worry, the current leadership is only there for 5 years. After 5 years, we will return the ANC to its former glory. How do you say that when you've just been elected last month you've been elected, well, 2 months ago you were elected as the Secretary General of the party, who's supposed to be the custodian of the party and the face of the party, yet you make these utterances. And that's the reason why you heard yesterday as well, Begicele came out and Begicele then lashed out at Ace Magashule, saying that give us the dairy money that you stole from our people. Remember the Vrede dairy farm a debacle that's currently unfolding, where money was used for allegedly used for the Gupta family wedding. And listening to Bheki Cele was squarely saying that you are guilty, bring back the money. And who's assuring you as Ace Magashule that you will still be part of the ANC's leadership over the next 5 years?
Yeah. Let's talk about Mr. Unity. In the mix of things, where does he stand? You recently just said that the ANC should rally behind one man, and that the man is ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa. Where does he stand? Well,
he has said that, and he's called on the ANC members. He was speaking last week in Polokwane and say that ANC members must rally around this one president, and he has said that he will protect this president, who is Cyril Ramaphosa. It would be quite interesting if you have a sit down with him to find out what his take is on this issue around the two centers of power, because I'll be honest on this one, I have a bit of a difficulty with this issue around the two centers of power. Because the issue around the two centers of power, and Paul Mashatile makes this as well, the Treasurer General of the ANC, is you can't have two centers of power, and that's the reason that why the president must go. And he made this assertion during an interview with one of the TV channels. Let's not forget that Paul Mashatile was the chairperson of the ANC in Gauteng, while you had David Mabuza being the premier of Gauteng. Why didn't that antagonistic relationship exist over two centers of power? Why is it an issue now? Because President Jacob Zuma is the president of the country and Ramaphosa is the president of the ANC. We can speak of the likes of John Block, for instance, who was the chairperson of the ANC in the Northern Cape, and you had Sylvia Luka, who is the premier was the premier in the Northern Cape. Why didn't this issue of the two centers of power exist? And really the list goes on. And if you listen back to what Thabo Mbeki said during the OR Tambo lecture, he said a spurious argument started existing ahead of the ANC's elective conference heading into Polokwane, where the ANC said they want to kill this issue around the two centers of power, and essentially adopted a policy that said that the president of the ANC must be the president of the country. And right now we have a situation where the elective conference of the ANC is not aligned with the electoral or the election year of the country and the election year of the ANC. Those things are not aligned. How do you then ensure that you don't have the issue of the two centers of power unless if you align those two elective phases, the one of the country and the one of the ANC? And where is the transition period during those two periods?
Now, so much has been said and done about President Zuma stepping down. Those calls have been made from as early as he started his second term. So why is it so critical that he should step down?
Why it's so critical for the ANC to want the president of who was once the president of the ANC to step down? Could it be because of the corruption allegations? Could it be because people have gone on the streets and protesting and saying that President Jacob Zuma has been a humiliation to the country, has humiliated this party? Could it be that the likes of Sipho Pityana has said, it's time that we act because people are corrupt, people are stealing from the ANC and using the ANC as a vehicle to steal? Could it be that the president of the country is seen as someone who's corrupt? And remember that he was at pains at once speaking in Parliament how he has been painted with this brush that he, Jacob Zuma, is corrupt, and he has always made the argument that he's not corrupt. There's no doubt whatsoever that the president of the country is embroiled in controversy. And when it comes to electioneering and when it comes to the court of public opinion, you may not have been found guilty in a court of law, but in the court of public opinion, they may have found you guilty already. And remember, even after the elections, after the 2016 elections, when the ANC went around, asked people why they didn't vote for the ANC, they mentioned the issue around corruption and so forth, but they also dealt with the issue around the ANC being unable to deal with President Jacob Zuma.
Sure. Now, shortly after Thabo Mbeki lost out in Polokwane in 2007, President Zuma said something very profound that I still remember to this day. He said that dealing with Thabo Mbeki at that particular point in time was like beating a dead snake. So those words surely are clearly coming back to haunt him. I mean, is Zuma a dead snake now at this particular point? Is he, just how vulnerable is he? And
the snake was buried, don't forget that. That's the other thing that was said. The snake was buried by the likes of Julius Malema, who were staunch supporters of President Jacob Zuma at the time. Is President Jacob Zuma a dead snake? Probably not. If he has the Secretary General of the party who is drumming up support for him, that is the likes of Ace Magashule, if he has the Deputy President, the Deputy Secretary General of the party, Jessie Duarte, who still seems to have faith in President Jacob Zuma, probably not. President Jacob Zuma is not yet a dead snake within the ANC.
Well, his support has diminished in the ANC and within the top six because, you know, DD doesn't really come out in the open as to whether he's supporting the calls to have him removed or not.
His support may have dwindled, but whether he's a dead snake, that's something else. And if a snake probably had legs, I would have said he may be a limping snake, but he's definitely not a dead snake within the ANC.
Now, Jessie Duarte and Ace Magashule have been singing a different hymn from the rest of the other members of the top six. So this so-called unity within the ANC, particularly the top six, is a farce.
It definitely is. And I saw a tweet actually from someone yesterday saying that, geez, if this is what unity is within the ANC, I wonder what factionalism is. Because this smells and tastes like factionalism, so it must be factionalism. And the party definitely has a difficult task heading into the elections. And remember that the likes of the DA are already in electioneering mode. You have the EFF campaigns, election manifestos will be launched quite soon. People will be going on the campaign, while the ANC is dealing with an issue of what do we do with President Jacob Zuma, but also those who are staunch supporters of President Jacob Zuma, what happens with them? And remember what happened back in 2008 after Thabo Mbeki lost and Thabo Mbeki was fired and recalled by the ANC. There was a split, and that split was called the Congress of the People. And I was speaking to someone early on, and I said that it would seem, listening back to President Jacob Zuma's speech after the, I think it was his last speech at the ANC's elective conference, he mentioned how at pains he was that there were splits within the party, like breakaway movements within the party. I guess there's no president within a movement that would like to see that. And that's what Ramaphosa is facing at the moment. How does he ensure that those who are staunch supporters of the ANC also rally behind him and rally behind the entire leadership and make sure that they have this, sometimes a facade of unity, although you'll be fighting inside, but on the outside, people see a unified ANC, especially heading into the elections.
Now, we're getting unconfirmed reports that Cyril Ramaphosa has just recused himself from this critical meeting that is bound to take place later on tonight about the recall of President Jacob Zuma. I know it may be too early to say at this point, but what do you read into that?
Remember that with Thabo Mbeki, it was the same thing as well. It wasn't the entire top six that went and told him. Jacob Zuma was in there and said that, Thabo Mbeki, we have decided that you must step down as president of the country. And one might see it as President Cyril Ramaphosa, now the president of the ANC, doesn't want to come across to President Jacob Zuma as the one who would be, you know, politically speaking, stabbing you in the back, because that's what happened before. Where you had the likes of President Jacob Zuma, who came out at in a press conference actually, and spoke about it won't be difficult to replace the president of the country, back then Thabo Mbeki, and said that they have staunch supporters of the ANC and members of the ANC who are capable, and one of those members was Kgalema Motlanthe. But the big one is, who will replace Jacob Zuma should he step down?
Big question, and you know, we railing. I mean, we definitely can't wait to hear that. Well, Aldrin, as always, thank you so much for your time and for chatting to us this afternoon. That's Aldrin Sampear, senior political reporter, helping us to get to the bolts and the nuts of the impending meeting between the top six, ostensibly to recall President Jacob Zuma. Let's now take a look back at President Zuma's career.
A son from the rural lands of Nkandla in KwaZulu-Natal, a head boy with no formal education.
Kodwa ngaqala ukuthi dabu ngeluse